All right, good evening. Thank you for coming. And certainly, we are very happy to have you here. Some of you, I know maybe for the first time, you have been in the pavilion of the town of Hempstead. So thank you. Thank you very much for coming. It is an honor to have the A.G. Schneiderman and many members of his senior staff here in Nassau County to tell us about what they are doing on our behalf each day to protect New Yorkers. The Attorney General has been, is strong, and an active leader, both in the state and nationally, taking on issues that impact all of us. He has stood up to powerful interests, both in public and private sectors, on behalf of New Yorkers, and worked to create a level playing field for all New York residents and businesses by enforcing one set of rules for everyone. He gained national recognition by fighting for a strong national mortgage settlement to hold banks accountable and help homeowners at risk of foreclosure. Nassau County, and this community in particular, was hit hard by the mortgage crisis. Many of you remember the forums held here in Councilmember District 1, organized by senior staffers, especially Valerie Singleton and others. Personal information regarding foreclosure and personal help and advice was provided. Thank you, Attorney General Schneiderman. Many saved their homes because of these forums. It is good to know that the Attorney General fought to get justice for the thousands of New Yorkers who were harmed by the crash of the economy and the practices of some of the banks. And he used funds accrued from banks to help make home ownership more affordable for New Yorkers, New York middle-class people. His office has taken a strong stand on issues of civil rights and labor rights. He ramped up the enforcement of labor laws to protect workers from illegally underpaid and protect honest businesses from unfair competition. I'm sure you'll be hearing more about the work of the office from the AG and the members of the staff that he has joining us this evening. Again, thank you for coming. And certainly, we are very, very proud to have the AG in our town, in District 1, in the town of Hempstead. And now, may I introduce to some, and I hope all of you know her. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Kathleen Rice, our District Attorney.
Thank you, Councilwoman Goosby. You are all so lucky to have Dorothy Goosby on your side because there is no greater advocate, and that's not hyperbole. And I'm not just saying that because you're here either. So this is such a great turnout. I don't know if it's because no one has air conditioning at home and this is the only cool place in town, but I'm glad I'm here because I was out in the heat all day. I am so happy to be here. I think one of the greatest things that a public servant in a position of Attorney General can do is do these community forums like this. It is so hard for people in a state as big as this to access their elected officials in any meaningful way. And I think that the Attorney General setting up these community forums where he goes all across the state with members of his senior staff, wanting to hear from people all across the state about what issues matter to you, what you need help with, so that he can be more responsive, is good government at its best. And I know something about Eric Schneiderman. We have been very good friends for a long time, and I have been happy to work with him over the last 4 years as DA and him in his role as Attorney General. No one has done more to address the epidemic of prescription drug abuse, which is not only the nation's #1 public health issue, but it's also our #1 public safety issue. No one has done more to address that epidemic than Eric Schneiderman. He got that I-STOP legislation passed that I'm sure you're going to hear about tonight that mandates real-time reporting of any prescription written or filled for any opioid drug. And I can't tell you how groundbreaking that legislation has been for local people at the local DAs at my level to help give us the tools that we need to fight this epidemic that is just growing day by day. So we have worked on a number of issues. No Attorney General has done more to level the playing field and speak truth to power and try to decrease the growing income inequality that we have here in this state and also across this country than Eric Schneiderman. I am very proud to be here today to introduce him to you, and without any further ado, I give you our great State Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out. Great crowd. Thank you to your great district attorney who has been a great colleague and worked with me on some of the things you're going to hear about tonight, a great advocate for dealing with the problems of guns, for dealing with the problem of prescription drug abuse, and protection of animals, and as well as just being a terrific law enforcement officer and a great colleague. Thank you to Kathleen Rice. And you know, all these great ideas could be done also at the federal level, I just want to point out, should you have the opportunity. I also want to thank Councilwoman Goosby for her welcoming us here, and for to all of you for coming out. This is, you know, a smart crowd. You have the wisdom to elect such hardworking and effective local and county officials to represent you. We also have some other colleagues in government here who I want to mention, assembly members. Schimmel, Solange, McDonough, thank you all for being here. I appreciate your presence. I've worked with you in passing important legislation in the past. County legislators, Ellen Birnbaum and Laura Curran. And the most important thing about tonight is not to listen to me, really. I'm going to talk to you and introduce the program. But the point tonight is that we're making an effort to bring the leaders of my office, the people who actually run the different divisions and bureaus, out to the communities where they can interact with folks who are activists on one or more of these issues. Because the important work of the office is done by we have 30 bureaus, we have 13 offices around the state, and Valerie Singleton, who heads our office in Nassau County, is here with us tonight. But we really have been making an effort, as has been noted, to get our folks out and around the state a lot more. And you should know that we are the people's lawyers. We are what I feel is very strongly the best public law firm in the country. And the bureau chiefs and everyone else, you can get access to all the information about us on our website, www.ag.ny.gov, and figure out who are the people you should be in touch with. But tonight we're going to give you a chance to talk to some of the most important folks in the office about the great work they do. I want to say that the first important lesson of public life is that nobody does anything alone. I'm a part of a team with the people in my office, and a team with other public officials, and a team with activists on a whole host of causes. No one does anything alone. To the extent that you have politicians who talk about like they accomplish things all by themselves, you should feel free to respectfully disagree. We do what we can do together. Anything significant, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the things we've accomplished in the office, but it is wonderful to be able to work with a talented group of people and a passionate group of people to get things done. I do not take that for granted. I do not take for granted for a minute the honor of being the New York State Attorney General. I have to tell you, I love this work. I've been a lawyer for a long time, spent more of my career in private practice than in government work before becoming Attorney General, and I understand business, and I represented a lot of businesses. I represented a lot of financial services firms, which is sort of a mixed bag for that industry, because that means I understand exactly what they're doing, and they know I know what they're doing. but I also understand their motivations and their point of view. I just want to tell you that the fundamental theme in our office has always been to make progress towards the American ideal of equal justice under law. I don't view the United States of America as just a country. It is a project. And the project is something that challenges every generation to leave the country a little more just, a little more equitable, a little better than we found it. And our generation is now challenged on a variety of fronts. And in our office, equal justice under law is what we try to work for every day. We are in the justice business. The building in Albany where our lawyers work is called the Justice Building. And this is something that we take very seriously. We try to bring to these efforts true commitment, commitment in the sense that we don't give up easily. We're not interested in taking on only problems that can be solved very quickly. As you will hear, there's some things we've been working on for years before we've had success. And we try to be creative. We will try things no one else has tried. And we always work to build coalitions. We always work to collaborate. I'm proud and happy to share credit whenever anything gets done. And I want to tell you that with this great group of people in my office, we've accomplished an awful lot in the last 3.5 years, and I'm looking forward, if the people of the state of New York will allow me to continuing to do this work for some longer period of time, because I feel that we're just getting started. Now, the first example, and that was already mentioned by your great district attorney, who was a true partner in this effort, was prescription drug abuse. And I want you to appreciate, because this involves a lot of people in your state government that accomplished something great together that no other state has been able to achieve. When I took office, the biggest crisis in terms of drugs was prescription drug abuse. We learned that regular drug gangs, who we bust with our organized crime task force, were carrying prescription drugs because their market was demanding it. The drug addicts and the people they sold drugs to said, we don't just want your heroin and cocaine, we want Vicodin and oxycodone. So we realized that this was really, and all the statistics confirm this, is a problem. In Long Island, this was particularly acute as a problem. Between 2004 and 2009, the number of overdose deaths in Nassau County from prescription opioids more than tripled. And we had a lot of support from the public officials here, including the district attorney. We got support from people in the medical community because we figured out that this is a problem of drugs that start out in control. They are not contraband that someone makes up in their backyard. We know where they come from. And we figured out that the problem with these drugs was not that people were hijacking trucks coming from the drug manufacturer. They were coming out through doctors and pharmacists. They were coming out through over-prescribing. And so we came up with a system that we knew was going to be hard to get enacted into law in Albany. And the system was to create a real-time database, which we have done, and we're the only state in America to do it, that, so that every doctor and pharmacist can see, for heavy-duty drugs, the prescription opioids that are the real problem. If I go into the doctor, do I have one prescription for oxycodone or do I have 5? And as a result, in the first 6 months of the program, the Department of Health reported that doctor shopping, the number of people who have had more than one prescription for the same drug, dropped 75%. That was just in the first few months of the program. We're ending doctor shopping in New York. Pharmaceutical companies are delivering smaller quantities of these drugs to New York pharmacies because you can't get them out of pharmacies and doctors in New York. The coalition we assembled, led by people from Nassau County, where we had murders and really some tremendous problems with drug overdoses, and we got a lot of leadership here. We organized a coalition of medical professionals, law enforcement, and courageous people who had lost children or other loved ones to prescription drug abuse, and that was the lobbying crew that enabled us to overcome the objections of the industry, which is not a lightweight industry, and we created this real-time tracking system. In the first 6 months, more than 66,000 pharmacists and doctors ran more than 7 million prescription checks. That is why we have stopped doctor shopping in New York, and now we're trying to export this idea to other states. We have also And again, this was done by this coalition of people who organized for it, but it was passed unanimously by the Senate and the Assembly and signed by the governor. So this is something great we've done in the state of New York, and I'm proud of our office's role in developing this idea and in pushing it through. We've also been dealing with another aspect of prescription drug abuse and heroin abuse, which has been on the rise during the same years the prescription drug problem was developing, by putting up money so this miracle drug, naloxone, can be in the possession of every police officer in the state of New York. This is something that actually stops people from dying from overdoses. The way you die when you get an overdose of heroin or an opioid is you stop breathing. This inhibits the opiates from causing you to stop breathing. It enables you to save lives and get people into treatment. We've saved, in a pilot program in Suffolk County, something like 185 people's lives. It's now being made available through our office to every police department in the state, because police officers are usually the first people at the scene of a problem, and we know that this is something that is going to save a lot of lives. We have been expanding our work with local police departments, including police departments here, because in our office we believe, we don't just believe in catching the bad guys, we focus on helping the good guys. And we realized the police departments needed naloxone. There's not something else we had to do, which I have to say surprised me that we had to do it, and it's sort of a disappointment that we had to do it, but I'm proud that we were able to do it. There was a federal program started in 1998 to reimburse police departments that bought bulletproof vests for their officers. That program was held up in Congress during all this craziness over the sequester and the budget stuff. A hold was put on a bill to refund it by Senator Coburn of Oklahoma, incredibly. I don't know why anyone in public service would want to prevent police officers from getting bulletproof vests. So we were able to take drug forfeiture funds, gang forfeiture funds that we get in cooperation with the federal government, and we are now filling that gap to replace the bulletproof vests that were funded by the federal government. And I've spoken directly to people in the White House, and we're attempting to get them to provide federal funds that they get from forfeitures to fill this gap, because that's every police officer who wants a bulletproof vest in the state of New York and all over America should have one. And our partnership with law enforcement gets stronger and stronger, and we're looking to help our partners not just elbow each other for credit for catching bad guys. We like to share credit with the police and with everyone else who works on these things with us. Now, my third example, and then I've got a lot of good examples, but I don't want to speak too long because I really want to introduce and turn this over to the great lawyers who actually make all this stuff happen. But the third example is important because we had a huge breakthrough in this last week. About a year ago or so, we realized that the fastest growing property crime in America was smartphone theft. I don't know if anyone here know anyone who's had their smartphone stolen? Yeah, some people do. It's 3 million people were victims of smartphone theft in 2013. They're really easy to steal. They're really easy to clean, what they call jailbreaking them, so it's like a new phone. And they're very easy to resell. There are fencing networks all over America, often to ship them overseas where the phones are actually worth more than they are here. So about a year ago, we called in all the smartphone manufacturers, and these are big players, Apple, Microsoft, Google, and confronted them with the fact that this was a problem that they could fix if they could just install a kill switch so you can cancel it like a credit card. And if the thieves know you're going to cancel it like a credit card, all they've stolen is a paperweight. The crime wave ends. So the companies acknowledged that they could do this and gave us all this gobbledygook about, well, we don't want to impose it on people, it's a matter of customer choice. And then we later found out that they were making $30 billion a year replacing lost and stolen smartphones. So we came to suspect that that might have been more of a reason for their slowness to install this life-saving element, because in addition to the thefts, there have been hundreds of thousands of assaults and dozens of murders related to smartphones. And again, we formed a coalition, and District Attorney Rice was a part of it, the Secure Our Smartphone Coalition, DAs, police chiefs, attorneys general all over America, more than 100 in our coalition, and we created pressure on these firms to do this. And some states, legislation was introduced to try and say you can't sell a smartphone in our state without a kill switch. And then Apple, to their credit, led the way on this. They installed an activation lock last fall that is not perfect. It was an opt-in, but more than 70% of the Apple subscribers were using it. And last week, we got the statistics in showing that since they installed that kill switch, thefts of iPhones were going down, while thefts of all the other phones were going up, because these guys were bringing the phones to the fences, and the fences were saying, hey, half of these iPhones you're bringing me are no good. Go get me something else. And that data broke the back of everyone else in the industry. They all said, okay, we give up, because we're not going to have it be known that our phones make you more vulnerable to a theft. So Google, Microsoft, who make the big operating systems, everyone agreed to install this technology. A year from now, this is not going to be a crime wave anymore. And that is something that in coalition, in collaboration, and using our creativity, we were able to accomplish together. It's really amazing to see an industry turn around that quickly. I really do, and I applaud all the companies that have made this commitment, but we do have to continue the pressure to see that kill switches are mandatory on every phone, and that you can opt out rather than opt in. The last thing I want to talk about, and we could talk about a lot of things that we've done to make the state safer. We have closed the gun show loophole in New York, and I'm proud to say that we're the only state that has done that in cooperation with the gun show operators, and that Gabby Giffords and Mark Kelly have acknowledged our work on this. We've done tremendous work, as you will hear from some of our bureau chiefs in labor and civil rights, in consumer protection and environmental work. But probably the biggest thing that we've done, and you've just already heard about it from your distinguished council member, but the biggest thing that we've taken on really was this misconduct by the banks, the giving out bad mortgages, packaging them into mortgage-backed securities, and creating a foreclosure crisis from which our state is still recovering. So this comes back to basically to, I say commitment. People on the other side of me call it stubbornness. It comes back to the fact that I just don't give up easily. When I became Attorney General, there were 345,000 New York families facing foreclosure. And I learned that more than half of them had not had a chance to talk to a lawyer at any point in the process. And I committed myself to doing something about this problem. I learned when I took office that there was already a deal in the works by all the AGs, along with the federal government, to settle the case with the 5 largest banks, and I thought, great, because I have other problems. Then I saw the deal, and I realized it was just a terrible deal. It was essentially letting these guys off the hook for a couple $2 billion and an agreement to write down mortgages they would have to write down anyway. So I said, I'm not going along with the deal, and the banks did not want to sign a deal without New York. So I had all these other attorneys general calling me up and calling my friends and calling other officials in New York. The guys in the Justice Department in Washington, at HUD, and people from the White House were calling up and trying to organize. And fortunately for me, pretty much everyone they called agreed with me. They were calling labor leaders in New York saying, can you tell this guy to go soft on the bank? And the union leaders were like, what? What are you talking about? I'm going to tell you to go soft on the banks that all my members are in foreclosure and our pension fund lost a lot of money. And we gradually built a coalition, and a few other AGs started calling me up and saying, you know, we think you're right, we should hold out. And I'm very proud of the fact that as a result of that work, the federal government changed its mind, and in his State of the Union address in 2012, the president announced that we were forming an unprecedented state-federal task force to investigate the fraud that led to the collapse of the American economy. And he made me a co-chair of the task force. The first settlement we got with one bank was much bigger than the proposed settlement I rejected for 5 banks. And that was the settlement with JP Morgan Chase for $13 billion, the largest single settlement in American history. And because of the work I did in the task force, $1 billion of that money came to New York. We are now funding over 90, thank you, over 90 legal services and housing counseling agencies, including HOP, what we call our Homeowner Protection Program, the HOP program, and there are HOP grantees in Nassau County. Some are represented here this evening, and they're on the front lines of keeping people in their homes. Because, and they've already seen in the just initial stage of this, well over close to 30,000 New York families. New York families are getting access to programs that are available from the federal government or from banks more than any other state. When we first got into this, HUD predicted that the first settlement would result in about $600 million worth of write-downs and mortgages for New York families. After the first year of the program, they announced that we had already hit $2 billion in write-downs for New York families because our people have housing counselors and lawyers, and no other state did that. So there is another barrier that some of these families face, and we're also funding land banks that enable communities to buy up vacant properties and rehab them, because a vacant property is a problem for everyone on the block, and it brings down property values for the whole community. A lot of creative programs are coming out of these settlements, and we're determined to help as many people as we can that were hurt by the misconduct and the crash of the housing market. But there is another barrier that we haven't been able to solve, and tonight I'm actually announcing a new addition to our HOP program that's going to help protect even more homeowners. Many families in New York need a mortgage modification and would qualify, but for one thing. They have another small debt, whether it's medical debt or credit card debt or a lien standing in the way. It could be some missed mortgage payments or interest or fees that accrued while the family was negotiating. So small debts like this can be dealt with. There are model programs out there, and I'm proud to say that we're now going to be replicating those programs and having in New York what we call the New York State Mortgage Assistance Program, or the MAP program. The MAP program is going to provide, through our HOP grantees, through these legal services and housing counseling agencies, they're now going to be able to provide small loans to families to pay off. We're talking about debts as small as, $10,000 that prevents a family from getting a modification on a $200,000 mortgage. Really kind of outrageous. We can make these small loans, and the families can pay them off after they've paid off the mortgage. You tack it on as sort of a second mortgage. Our partner agency, the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, has already tested this program with a pilot program in New York City that let families apply for loans up to $25,000. And that pilot program, which was only run on a very small scale, helped about 100 families keep their homes. We know it works, and we're now rolling it out statewide. So here in Nassau County, our HOP service providers, the legal services and housing counseling agencies, are going to be able to provide loans, small loans, to help families who have a small debt that stands in the way of a mortgage modification that prevents them from keeping their home. And we're expanding the number, the size of the loans up to $40,000. We're planning to make hundreds of loans. And we're rolling this out in phases, and the first region where we will be accepting applications is Long Island, because we know how hard Long Island was hit by the foreclosure crisis. This is a part of the state that had really the worst of the worst. Big boom, big bust, and these loans are going to be administered by the HOP network. They will be non-interest-bearing loans due only on the maturity of the mortgage, and we're looking forward to having this as an addition to the innovative programs we're rolling out. And as we settle with more banks, we're going to have more programs. But my commitment to you is this: no New Yorker, no New York family should ever lose their home because they don't have a lawyer, a housing counselor. There's relief out there that they just don't know they're eligible for, or there's a really small barrier to them getting that relief. We want everyone eligible to have their mortgage written down, to have their rate lowered, to be able to stay in their home, to stay in their home. It's good for everyone. It's an investment for our whole community and for our whole state, because when a family has to abandon its home, kids are pulled out of school, jobs are lost, it's bad for everyone, and we recognize it. We're all in this together. We're all in this together, and the only way we dig ourselves out of this hole is to do it together. So I am very proud of the fact that tonight we're announcing that program, and we are going to be rolling it out first here in Long Island. So tonight you're going to hear from the experts in my office. I sued another bank today, and you may have heard about it. So I'm sort of running. I have to run back into New York, and it was another massive fraud that I'll tell you about another night. But the areas that you're going to hear about tonight include workers' rights, the environment, health care, civil rights, consumer protection, which really spans a whole range of frauds and scams. And we're joined by, and I guess we're going to probably get to hear their names several times, but that's good, our Environmental Protection Bureau Chief Lem Sralovic, our Labor Bureau Chief Terry Gerstein, Lisa Landau from Healthcare, of course Valerie, the head of our regional office here, Alvin Bragg, who's the Executive Deputy Attorney General in charge of our Social Justice Division, which oversees a whole series of bureaus, and Marty Mack, who is an Executive Deputy Attorney General and one of my top advisors, who really keeps track of things and supervises things in all of our regional offices around the state. And with that, I want to thank you again for being here. I'm going to thank you again for being a part of this coalition of New Yorkers that enables us to get these things done. And I want to turn things over to an extraordinary lawyer, the Executive Deputy Attorney General in charge of all of our regional offices, Marty Mack. Thank you.
And I am just going to, I'm going to speak on consumer affairs in a minute, but I want to introduce and turn this program over to the head of our Nassau regional office, Valerie Singleton.
Thank you, Marty, for that introduction, and thank you all for coming out tonight. The Attorney General is wholeheartedly committed to equal justice. The Attorney General often has talked about how appropriate it is that his Albany office is located in the Justice Building. As representatives of the people's attorney, the Attorney General has asked us to ensure justice for Nassau County citizens by protecting you from sham businesses and criminals who prey on trusting people. We are currently prosecuting scam artists for operating a mortgage fraud that targeted at least 10 Long Island families. Distressed homeowners believed that they were refinancing their homes, but in reality, title to their homes and $1.3 million in equity were taken from them. Because of our investigative efforts, which tied into the U.S. Attorney's Office prosecution, one of the criminals, a disbarred attorney, has pled guilty and now faces 5 years in prison. Our office has also investigated, along with the district attorney, New Faces, a bogus modeling agency operating in our Long Island shopping malls and beaches. They preyed on parents' desires to give their children a better life by offering their children modeling jobs that never existed and falsely portraying success stories of their clients. Several defendants have pled guilty and have been ordered to repay victims over $260,000 in restitution. This evening, you are going to hear from the Attorney General's high-level executive staff members, Marty Mack, Alvin Bragg, Lisa Landau, Terry Gerstein, and Lemuel Sralovic, about some of the great work done by the bureaus represented here tonight. Following the panel, we will have a question and answer period. Please write down any questions you have on the comment cards that may be inside the programs that you received this evening, and pass it to any of our staff members that are in the aisles. Before I introduce the first panelist, I just want to acknowledge the staff from the Nassau Regional Office. If they would just stand. Thank you. Now at this time, I would like to introduce my immediate supervisor, who is a phenomenal supervisor, Marty Mack. He is the Executive Deputy Attorney General of the regional offices. He supervises not only my office, but all of the regional offices across the state. Today, he is going to speak to you about the statewide effort to protect New York consumers.
Thank you, Val. An important part of the Attorney General's job is to protect consumers. And as you all know, we're all consumers. And most of our money is spent in the consumer marketplace buying consumer goods and services. So it's important. So when we enter that consumer marketplace, it's important that there is fair and honest dealing and that the products we buy are safe. Because everything costs enough of it as it is without being ripped off in the process. So I'm just going to give you an example of a few of the cases we've worked on statewide, and some of the names you'll recognize. One sector of the marketplace involves two big stores across the country, Michael's and Hobby Lobby. So some of you might know them. And the message that came with our case against those two stores is that you can't call a sale unless it's a sale. And what Hobby Lobby and Michael's were in the practice of doing is calling everything a sale every day. And if it's an endless sale every day, there is no sale. And words send messages to consumers. So if a store says it's on sale, it better be on sale. The law requires that that language be truthful and honest so that you can interpret that message to mean that there is going to be a savings. So we ended those practices. Instead of having endless sales, when there is a sale, they call it a sale. Otherwise, it's just an everyday price. And so that is intended to help guide consumers to know when prices are better than other times. Another problem that we've faced is synthetic drugs. And this has become a consumer problem in a way, because very often it's young men and women who go into these stores, our kids, and buy what they in some ways think is safe. Because if something's in a strip mall, a retail store that has the guise of legitimacy, and they go in there and buy what they think probably will have some effect, make them feel better, they think, well, they couldn't sell it if it was bad, or if it was dangerous, if it was unsafe. So what we did, because of all the information we are getting from emergency rooms and doctors around the state, that these synthetic drugs sold at head shops and other like places were more dangerous than drugs. They were more dangerous because the emergency rooms didn't know what the kids were taking. The kids didn't know what they were taking. And so the emergency rooms didn't know how to treat it. So we used that fact, the fact that nobody knew what was in them, to stop it. We used the labeling laws. Since they didn't label what was in these products, they were a violation of the law. So on a single day, we went into court and we shut down these head shops around the state because they were unsafe and they weren't labeling what was in the container. It's using consumer law to keep the consumer safe. Another matter, a name you all know, is Walmart. Well, heading into Father's Day, they were selling in their ads Coca-Cola for $3 a liter. As it turned out, though, in many stores, the consumer went in and they were being charged $3.50. And when they went to complain to the manager would say, well, that's what the machine is showing, so it must be that you have to ask for the discount. So people were required to leave the register, to go over to the service office and get the discount. That's not what a promotional ad is supposed to provide. If it says in the ad $3, it's supposed to be $3. So the only one that had a good Father Day when it came to Coke was Walmart that weekend. So they've changed that, and they've been fined, and they're being disgorged of those monies that were overpaid to them. And lastly, I just want to mention something that's very close to home and where we got involved, and that was after Sandy. Gas gouging was widespread. And the gouging law means that is when there's an abnormal disruption of the market, when there's a state of emergency, a triggering event such as Sandy, stores cannot charge an unconscionably larger amount more than they charged before the storm. And yet it was widespread on Long Island. And we went after and received settlements with 50 gasoline stations. Vail herself was really cracking down on store after store, the gas station, the convenience stores. Some were increasing their prices $1, $1.50, $1.75. And so in protecting that consumer, we reached settlements which disgorged these gas stations of all their profits and also fined them to send a message. So those are the types of cases that are important to Attorney General Schneiderman. Those are the cases Attorney General Schneiderman asks us to bring, and those are the cases we try to bring for the consumer. But we need your help. We need to call our office, call Val when you have a complaint, when you see something that is dishonest, unfair, or unsafe. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. As Marty said, we need your help in order to help you, and we really want to hear from you this evening. So I just want to remind you to fill out those comment cards that have been provided to you. Fill it out with your questions, and the staff will pick up the cards. If you need a card, just raise your hand, and one of the staff members will come around and give you a card. Now I would like to introduce Alvin Bragg. Alvin Bragg serves as the Executive Deputy Attorney General for Social Justice. He oversees the social justice divisions of 6 bureaus. Today he will be speaking about the efforts of the Civil Rights Bureau to promote equal justice under the law and enforce the civil rights of all New Yorkers. Let's welcome Alvin.
Thank you. I'm gonna talk about civil rights, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit, if you let me, about our Charities Bureau and some of the work of the not-for-profits. And then you'll hear from the bureau chiefs in the division about the other work that's being done in healthcare, environment, and labor. But let me start with civil rights. You heard Val say it, and you heard the Attorney General say it. The whole office is committed to equal justice under law, and that's the Civil Rights Bureau's core mission, that every New Yorker is treated equally under the law, regardless of race, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, age, whether you're disabled or not. Our core mission is to make sure that all New Yorkers receive equal treatment under the law. And that includes almost everything you can think about that you do in your daily lives, or the things that are important to us as New Yorkers and Americans. So equal treatment by your employer, equal treatment when you go to vote, equal treatment in, as Marty was talking about, our places of public accommodations, your Walmarts, your malls, and other places where you shop and dine. So across the spectrum, that's what the Civil Rights Bureau is working on, making sure that all New Yorkers are treated the same and receive equal access and treatment under the law. I thought for tonight I would just give 2 examples of work that we've done on Nassau County. The first, it really grows out of things that the Attorney General mentioned, and that's really just our partnerships. While we will often sue people, we often will collaborate, particularly with local governments. In addition to the work addressing the opioid epidemic and trying to address the heroin epidemic, we've also worked with police departments across the state to make the services of the police departments more accessible to the people in the various counties. And one way we've really focused on that is language access. So if you think about it, if something were to happen, you walk outside and something happens to you, you need to call the police. If you don't speak English that well, you're not proficient in English, in many counties that presents a challenge. And so we've entered into agreements with various local police departments to help them strengthen the procedures they use to help non-English speakers or people who are more comfortable in a different language. And one county is the Nassau County Police Department. We worked with them and we entered into an agreement to help, whether you're sort of a victim or a witness to a crime, if you interact with the police department here, to help them in terms of training police officers, helping them find ways to recruit bilingual officers, and helping them to work on ways to provide translation and interpretation services. So that's another way, in addition to the ways that the Attorney General spoke about earlier, that we're in partnership with local law enforcement, and that's something we're very proud about because we want everyone to be able to access all critical services, and really there are few more critical services than interacting with your local police department. Another example from Nassau County is access in a different way, going back to the strip mall that Marty talked about. We did an investigation in the Civil Rights Bureau looking at access for people with disabilities, in particular in wheelchairs, to various malls across the state. And we entered into 2 settlement agreements with very large owners of strip malls, requiring them to make their facilities, their common areas, the parking lots, the ramps more accessible, parking spaces wider, the ramps used by people in wheelchair, making the slopes ones that could be used. So we're very proud of that work, and it spans the state, including malls right here in Nassau County, like Jericho Commons or the Manhasset Center. So that's just a very brief overview of the Civil Rights Bureau and the type of ways that the Bureau goes about making sure that everyone has equal access under law. With Val's permission, I'm going to switch to the Charities Bureau for a moment. The Charities Bureau is the front line regulator for not-for-profits in the state. So if you operate a not-for-profit, or if you're being someone is soliciting you for fundraising, those are the type of issues we address. We try to support not-for-profits in terms of governance advice and helping small and mid-sized not-for-profits navigate the law in the area in terms of what board of directors should be doing and how they should be servicing the folks who've placed their charitable trust in them. And the Attorney General talked about that a little bit earlier, our dual role of helping the good guys. That's something that we do a lot in the Charities Bureau. But not surprisingly, as in other areas, we also go after very bad actors. And I'm sure this has happened to many people in this room. You're sitting down to dinner, and you want to do something like talk to your family or watch TV, and the phone rings, and it's someone from blah, 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 blah charity. You can hardly even make it out, and they tell you that they're raising money for something that sounds like a worthy cause. And if you have a spare moment, you ask them a couple of follow-up questions. They can't answer them, or they're very evasive, or they just pressure you to give over the phone. So you should be very wary of that. And we look into that type of conduct. And we recently entered into a settlement a couple of months ago with a charity that was soliciting in Nassau and Suffolk counties. And something we found, and it applied to this charity, is that when folks call and try to raise money, they really try to pull at the heartstrings. So this charity was calling around Nassau County and was saying that they were helping victims of domestic violence, helping the hungry, and helping to do breast cancer research. And then when we did our investigation, we found out that less than 4% of the money that hardworking New Yorkers sent to them when they sent out this call, less than 4% of that money actually went to a charitable purpose. The rest of the money went into the pockets of the folks who were making the fundraising calls. So I see your hand. We're going to take questions at the end. And if you could use the card, we'll make sure to get to it. So that's just an example out of the Charities Bureau of the type of work that we're doing to protect New Yorkers from these shams. They're very similar to the consumer shams that Marty talked about, but they happen from not-for-profits, institutions that we should be able to trust. So I will end much the same way that Marty ended, which is that really to do the work that we do, we need your help. The cases I've mentioned, start with complaints from citizens. Our web address is on there, on the program you have, on some hotline numbers, and the ways that we can continue to help you is when you bring these issues to us. You get the call at night from a charity that doesn't sound quite right, write the phone number down and call us and give us the phone number, and we'll follow up. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvin. I just want to note that under the direction of the Attorney General, Alvin's division has done a marvelous job. And in particular, I remember one case, recent case, where they ended discriminatory practices in a nursing facility in upstate New York. At this time, I'm going to introduce our next panelist, who is Lisa Landau. Lisa currently serves as Chief of the Healthcare Bureau at the New York State Attorney General's office, where her bureau enforces healthcare law, including consumer protection law, to protect New Yorkers as they confront the challenges of the healthcare system. Prior to rejoining the Attorney General's office in 2011, Lisa was the Executive Director of New York City's Nurse Family Partnership, a nationally recognized, evidence-based anti-poverty program. Lisa also previously served in the New York Attorney General's office from 1999 to 2006, serving as Director of the Reproductive Rights Unit. And prior to that, as an Assistant Attorney General in the Attorney General's Civil Rights Bureau, Lisa worked on an array of civil rights cases, including sex discrimination, police misconduct, and mortgage lending fraud. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks, Val. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So we like to think that the Healthcare Bureau's actions and initiatives bring us closer to leveling the playing field for the citizens in New York State and bring the public that much closer to health equity. The Healthcare Bureau investigates and brings enforcement actions against actors in the health arena, including health plans, drug companies, healthcare lenders, and health-related businesses that engage in fraudulent, misleading, deceptive, or illegal practices. So in addition to having a group of lawyers who work on investigations and enforcement actions, we are fortunate to have a group of paralegals who staff a helpline and resolve individual consumer complaints. And the number is on your, I think up there on the screen, and also in your brochures here. And we urge you to use that number because it's an amazing group of people that every day are working to help individuals across the state deal with the very gnarly things you have to deal with in getting coverage from your health plans. In 2013 alone, our helpline fielded almost 6,000 calls and resolved 3,300 or so individual cases, which resulted in about $4 million going back into the pockets of consumers overall through refunds or canceled debt. And the helpline calls also tip us lawyers off on what are the patterns that are going on across the state. We can look at our data and really get a sense of what the systemic problems are. So we too are reliant on consumers to call us to let us know what's going on. So I just want to quickly mention 3 of our current areas of concern in the Healthcare Bureau. First is public health. Which is a pretty broad area, but I'll narrow it to 2 issues we've been working on, or 3, quickly. The Healthcare Bureau has been particularly focused on enforcing the mental health parity laws. These are laws, federal and state laws, that require health plans not to discriminate against members with behavioral health needs and to cover the treatment to which they're entitled. We've been finding that some plans are blatantly excluding certain kinds of behavioral health coverage, like residential treatment for eating disorders, and that certain plans are second-guessing doctors in the mental health realm more than in the medical surgical realm, particularly where the claims relate to substance abuse treatment. In March, we announced our first settlement with a major health plan, MVP, a plan with 500,000 members. The plan agreed to cover residential treatment in the future and to review past claims, so to reimburse consumers for what they paid out of pocket and to equalize copays for behavioral health providers. In addition, there's going to be an independent review of over $6 million worth of previously rejected claims. And we've also been focused on misrepresentations made by the tanning salon industry. It's now well known that tanning bed usage is associated with increased skin cancer, especially when indoor tanning starts when someone's young. And as these risks have become more known, a number of big tanning salon enterprises have been falsely touting health benefits, including some pretty outrageous claims like tanning cures or prevents cancer, that it increases production of vitamin D. And we're rolling out a number of agreements with these salons and announced our first settlement with Hollywood Tans, a national chain, where the salons agreed not to make health representations in the future and not to focus advertising on high school students, and to engage in additional training of staff and pay penalties. And with respect to women's health, I want to say that in May, we announced an agreement with a major health plan, Empire Blue Cross, to make sure that women who are diagnosed with breast cancer and require a mastectomy are able to get reconstruction surgery on an in-network basis if there is no in-network plastic surgeon at the hospital where her in-network mastectomy surgeon practices. So this has been actually an issue that's been one that's come up through Long Island complaint, and so I wanted to mention that here tonight. I also wanted to mention briefly our focus on medical debt, which is the reason for about 60% of all bankruptcies. And our focus is on medical debt caused by consumer fraud or illegality, and I'll give you two examples. In April, we settled a case against 4 predatory lenders or actors, one that acted as a broker for online medical loans, and the other 3 financed the loans. And these loans had interest rates ranging from 25 to 55%. And these folks weren't registered, so we're illegally doing this lending and financing, and we rolled back the interest rates and are refunding overpayments to the tune of some $230,000 that are going back to consumers. And another example of healthcare bureau work in the predatory health loan arena is a case we settled last summer with GE Care Credit. So GE makes this healthcare credit card called Care Credit, and it's 0% interest for a certain promotional period. But what many consumers did not know, that after the promotional period was finished, that 27% interest would begin to be charged from the date of your initial transaction. So our settlement put into place a new set of procedures and protections, really, for consumers, including a 3-day cooling off period, new disclosures, so consumers would really understand that if they didn't pay within that promotional period, you're going to be socked with a pretty high interest rate. And limitations on prepayment, which often the dentist's office were doing. And I just want to say that the Federal Consumer Protection Bureau followed New York's lead and entered into a settlement with GE for the rest of the country some 6 months later. So we were really setting a pathway to help not only New Yorkers, but folks across the country. And finally, I want to just mention that our third area of focus is, that I'll just talk briefly about, is the area of medical care costs and insurance coverage. So our office may not be able to control prices, but we certainly can help to ensure that health plan disclosures are clear so that consumers understand their policies and what their policies pay for and what they don't. So that consumers have the information they need to choose, so they need to choose wisely. And we've entered into a wide range of agreements with health plans who are not disclosing accurately, including settlements against 10 health plans for inaccurate provider directories, a big issue that's come up in the context of the new health exchange. And the health exchange has been very successful in a lot of ways, and we're very happy about that. But there are issues that we've been watching, including that one, that folks sometimes get into a plan with the notion that their provider is on a list, and then they find out that the provider is not on the list. So we're watching that area very carefully. So the bottom line is that we're watching out for consumers, whether it's fraudulent businesses or practices that, or hiding the ball in some way. We're here to level the playing field and to achieve equity and justice on behalf of New Yorkers across the state. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. I know navigating around the healthcare industry can be very difficult, so I would encourage all of you to use or to call the Healthcare Bureau's hotline. They really do a great job in assisting consumers. In fact, they have been very instrumental in helping the regional office, the Nassau regional office, in resolving some healthcare issues on behalf of consumers. So again, Lisa, I want to thank you. Now, before I introduce the next speaker, I again want to remind you to fill out the comment cards and pass them to our staff. Even if we don't get to your question tonight, during the question and answer period, we will get back to you with an answer through email or by phone. So it's very important that when you fill out the comment card, if you would put your phone number or your email address. Also, members of the regional office will be around the informational table in the foyer after the presentation concludes, and we will be happy to address any question that you may have as well at that time. Now, at this time, I would like to introduce the Attorney General's Labor Bureau's Chief, Terry Gerstein. Prior to becoming the Bureau Chief, Terry was a Deputy Commissioner in the New York State Department of Labor. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. So I am the Labor Bureau Chief, and I feel like my moment has finally arrived because right now in the U.S. there is so much talk about income inequality and about low-wage workers and about raising the minimum wage. And as important as it is to have good statutes, having great laws on the books is most meaningful when those laws are really aggressively enforced. And that is what we do in the Labor Bureau. We enforce the basic labor laws, especially the ones that protect the lowest wage workers, minimum wage, overtime, the right for workers who get tips to actually keep their tips and not have them stolen, the right for workers who do construction work on public buildings to be paid a higher rate, the prevailing wage that's required by law. Like the other bureaus in the Attorney General's office, we choose our cases in a way that seeks to have a greater impact and deter other employers from similar types of violations. And often we focus on particular industries in order to do that. So in the past few years, we've been doing a lot of work involving fast food employers, car washes, taxi fleets, construction companies, moving companies, and others. In the Labor Bureau, we bring cases both civilly as lawsuits, but also we bring criminal prosecutions against employers when they've committed violations that rise to a sufficient level of seriousness. Over the past 3 years, we've secured over $16 million for over 10,000 workers in New York State, along with $2.5 million in penalties and fees for the state. I think the best way of giving you a picture of what we do is to give a few examples of some of our cases. The first one I want to talk about tonight is something that's familiar to everyone, which is fast food restaurants. And it might surprise people because these are very large national corporations, so it might be surprising to people to learn that there are actually minimum wage and overtime violations at these types of businesses. We have a number of fast food investigations ongoing, and we've already had several settlements that I'll tell you about, and they really exemplify some of the types of challenges faced by low-wage workers and violations that we see involving low-wage workers. A couple of months ago, we announced settlements with 7 Domino's franchisees who run Domino's locations in 26 different Domino's locations throughout the state, from Buffalo to Westchester, New York City, and also here on Long Island. And the various franchisees had different types of violations. Some of them were not paying overtime. Some of them were not adequately compensating the drivers who deliver pizzas for their costs in driving the car, for fully compensating them for gas and insurance and all of the costs of operating the car. And amazingly, some of them were even paying below the New York State minimum wage for delivery workers. In those cases, they affected over 800 workers. We recovered almost $500,000, and it was a good example of, the types of challenges that face low-wage workers. Another issue that has arisen in those cases is that there is a lower tipped wage that workers can get paid when they get tips. and often workers have to do all kinds of work, working in the kitchen where they're not getting any tips at all, and yet still get that lower tip rate, which is against the law. We had a case a settlement we announced involving a New York City McDonald's franchisee who had 5 different locations. This affected over 1,000 workers, and we recovered approximately $500,000 in that case. In that case, the situation was that the employees were required to wear a uniform, and under the law, if an employee has to wear a uniform, the employer has to give money, either launder the uniform for the employee or give money so the employee can wash it him or herself, because it's a condition of the job. And you can imagine if you're working in a McDonald's, at the end of the day, that uniform really, really needs to be washed. And so this employer was not paying the uniform maintenance allowance and was requiring workers to do their own laundering without paying that money to cover the cost that was a necessary cost of having the job. In 2 of our fast food cases, an issue arose that I think is a really critical issue for enforcing the labor laws, which is retaliation against employees for complaining about violations. And these are very compelling cases, I think. One of them was in a Domino's restaurant in Washington Heights in New York City. Some workers complained about this practice I described, complained to their supervisor about having to do all kinds of work in the kitchen, even though they were getting paid a lower tipped rate. So they had no opportunity to get tips from customers during that time. So several workers complained, and the employer basically said, "Get out, you're out." And it turned out that as a result of that interaction, 25 workers were locked out of their jobs. And it was right before Christmas. It was about 3 weeks before Christmas, which just added to the, how awful this was for people. We got involved, we investigated the retaliation, and we managed to get, within a matter of days, a signed agreement from the employer to reinstate all of those workers. And 8 days after they were discharged, all of those workers had been reinstated. And that was a very important, meaningful resolution, because if workers get reinstated if workers are fired after they exercise their rights, then that chills other workers standing up for themselves. But if people are reinstated and back on the job, similarly, that sends a message to other workers that they can stand up for their rights, and that they are not able to be fired for that. We had another case that we announced last week upstate, in which a worker at a McDonald's, the facts of this case are pretty striking. A worker at a McDonald's upstate detected a gas leak in the restaurant. He thought the equipment wasn't assembled properly. So he told his supervisor, who told him to get back to work, and he called 911. The fire department came, the police department came. They confirmed there was a gas leak. They closed the restaurant for the night to the public. And what happened to the employee? The employee got fired. So that is just truly, truly egregious. It turns out there is a law, Labor Law 740, on point, which prohibits employers from retaliating against workers for reporting to the government or to a supervisor something that represents specific and current risk to public safety and health. And so in that case, the worker did not want to be reinstated to the job. One of the remedies typically is a worker gets reinstated. That worker did not want to go back to that workplace, and we were able to get him a 1.5 years of front pay in lieu of reinstatement, so what he would have been paid for the next 1.5 years had he continued working there. In addition to our civil cases, we bring criminal cases, and generally we do criminal prosecution for very serious violations, repeat violators, employers who've committed some kind of fraud, or employers who, amazingly enough, just don't pay workers at all and stiff people completely. So one example of a case was a case involving cleaners of a movie theater in Brooklyn. The U.S. Department of Labor investigated this cleaning company. They did a great investigation. They showed up at 1 in the morning. They talked to the workers. They found violations. The employer signed an agreement with the U.S. Department of Labor that they would comply with the law and they'd pay back the workers. They paid the workers, and then they required the workers to pay that money back and continued violating the law. So that was a case that we brought criminally because, you know, to proceed with further civil enforcement against an employer like that is likely not to be very fruitful. And that employer ultimately pled guilty and was sentenced to some jail time. Another criminal case we brought involved a very sad situation of a tortilla factory in Brooklyn where a young man fell into a tortilla mixer and died. And there wasn't proper safety equipment. And the safety and health issues are addressed by the federal agency, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. But we learned that that employer did not have workers' compensation and was underpaying workers was not paying workers overtime. And so not having workers' compensation insurance for 6 or more employees is a felony. And we prosecuted that employer. He ultimately pled guilty, and he too ultimately was sentenced to some time in jail. One final note that I'll share with all of you, which is that we recently had our first foray into looking at more of a public policy issue, which is that increasingly employers are paying wages to workers not just by check or direct deposit, but by pay cards. Is anyone here paid by a pay card? Some people. So what pay cards are, they're like prepaid cards, like a debit card, and the employer loads the money onto the card, pays a vendor to do this, and the money gets loaded on the card each pay period, and the worker uses that to access his or her wages. And pay cards aren't inherently bad because they're good for the environment and they're cost saving for employers. And for workers who don't have access to banks, they can be very helpful and they're less expensive than a check cashing outlet. But the problem is that in many instances, we sent letters to give some background on what we did. We started to learn and get complaints from workers about problems with pay cards. So we sent letters to several dozen employers and received responses, and we ultimately issued a report a couple of weeks ago analyzing the pay card programs of 38 employers. And what we found is that some employers did not, as required by law, obtain employees' prior consent before signing them up for a payroll card. Under the law, employers have to get employees' written consent to pay them in this manner, and some employers weren't doing that. A lot of times there were fees that were not disclosed to people, so they didn't necessarily know if I go to this ATM to get out my money, I'm going to end up having a $1 fee. Or if I do a balance inquiry at the ATM just to find out how much money I have, that's going to cost me $1 or $1.50. And so the fees weren't all adequately disclosed to people. And then some of the fees were just, excessively high and inappropriate. And so we issued a report that contained a number of policy recommendations there's currently no law in New York directly on point because this is a new emerging technology, but we had policy recommendations for what a good law governing payroll cards would look like that would really protect workers' rights. So these are some examples of the cases that we're working on. We work closely with advocacy groups and unions and community organizations and people on the ground and in the community. As others have said, we really, really rely on people in the community to bring our attention to cases and to tell us about what is happening at workplaces throughout the state and where we can intervene in a way that brings more meaningful justice to New York's workers. So please keep in touch with us. Let us know if there are situations where our intervention could be of use. And thank you so much for the time tonight.
Thank you, Terry. Shortly, we will be taking questions from you. So this is a final reminder. It's very important that you fill out the comment cards. Staff members are walking down the aisle to collect question cards from you. If you need a comment card, they will certainly hand out a comment card to you. But it's very important for you to fill it out so that we could collect the cards from you and answer your questions. Now I would like to welcome our final panelist, the Attorney General's Environmental Bureau Chief, Lemuel Schroller-Vick. Previously, Lem served in the Bureau as a Section Chief of Affirmative and Enforcement Litigation, where he led a team of lawyers and scientists enforcing state and federal environmental laws ranging from limits on engine idling by diesel trucks and buses to laws protecting our wetlands and waters. Let's welcome Len.
Thank you, and good evening. The guiding principle of Attorney General Schneiderman's Environmental Protection Bureau is that every New Yorker has a right to clean and healthy air, water, and communities in which to live. The Bureau enforces, defends, and protects those rights. Attorney General Schneiderman's Environmental Protection Bureau is active in all levels of state and federal courts, enforcing and defending the laws that are in place to protect our health, safety, and welfare, and that protect our amazingly rich and diverse natural places and resources like our coastal waters and our public lands. I'd like to give you just a few quick examples of our environmental work. First, in fighting for New Yorkers' right to breathe clean air, Attorney General Schneiderman led a broad coalition of states and cities supporting the Federal Environmental Protection Agency against out-of-state polluters and won a case in the U.S. Supreme Court that reinstated a federal cross-state air pollution rule, which will reduce air pollutants that blow into New York and our communities from neighboring states that contribute to soot and smog pollution, which threatens the health of millions of our residents. Second, to protect our communities from threats posed by climate change, Attorney General Schneiderman successfully defended New York State's participation in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in a legal challenge brought by outside political interests. The Greenhouse Gas Initiative is demonstrating that reasonable action to cut greenhouse gas emissions can be taken now with positive effects. First, air pollutants that injure human health and warm the planet are reduced. And second, this initiative has helped New York raise hundreds of millions of dollars to fund energy efficiency and alternative energy investments that lower energy costs now and pay economic and environmental dividends into the future. Third, to protect Long Island's groundwater from the threat posed by industrial chemicals, we recently won a $6.7 million judgment in a hazardous waste cleanup case against the owners of a former printing facility here on Long Island. The facility contaminated groundwater with an industrial solvent that threatened a public water supply well. Fourth, to protect the public's right to access and use public parks for their intended recreational and park purposes, Attorney General Schneiderman recently won a decision in our High Court concerning a park here on the North Shore of Nassau called Kings Point Park, which affirmed the public's right to use all of the land within a public park for park recreational purposes, and ruled that the owner of the land, a municipality, could not unilaterally convert a portion of that park to other uses like a town highway department garage. Hopefully these examples will give you a sense of our work on behalf of New Yorkers' health and our environment. We certainly welcome your thoughts and ideas for further actions in these vitally important areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Lem. Let's give all of our panelists a round of applause. That concludes the first half of our program. We will now be taking questions from the audience. As I mentioned, if you didn't get a chance to write down your question, just see one of the staff members and they will get a card to you. If we don't get to your question during the question and answer period, Members of the regional office will be outside in the hall awaiting your questions. We would be more than willing to speak with you and to answer your questions. Also, if you put your information on the back of the comment card, we will be happy to respond to your questions at a later date by phone or email. Now, one of the first questions, most retail and personal service establishments are required to show the price of goods or post a menu of service costs. This does not seem to be the case with dry cleaning stores, unless they are advertising a special with a window sign. No price lists are to be seen. Are they exempt? If so, why? If not, which government agency can effectuate change? I'm going to direct this question to Marty.
Well, the dry cleaning industry is interesting because they generally have standard prices for shirts, but then within shirts, they have one price for men's shirts and one price for women's shirts. And for some reason, they generally charge more for the women's shirt. And that's been looked at various times. But when you go into a dry cleaner store, you're rarely going to find a price list. You can ask them and they have to tell you, but I'm not aware of any requirement that makes them have a list in the store. There may be some local ordinances, but I'm not aware of those either around the state. What they can't do, of course, is what Vale said. They can't deceive, they can't misrepresent, they can't give one price and charge another.
Thank you, Marty. The next question is, the continued availability of clean, healthy drinking water is of major importance to Long Islanders. What is the Office of the Attorney General doing to protect Long Island's precious drinking water? I'm going to direct this to Lem.
Sure. Well, Attorney General Schneiderman is very active in this area, and let me give you two quick examples. I mentioned the hazardous waste cleanup case that we recently won a decision in federal court. We have scores of action like that in Nassau County, in Suffolk County, that protect, preserve, and provide the state with the financial resources necessary to quickly investigate and respond to chemical spills or other contaminants in our environment that threaten New York's groundwater supply. Secondly, the Long Island Pine Barrens are a very important source of very high-quality drinking water here on Long Island, and that to protect Long Island's drinking water, we also must protect the Pine Barrens. And in that regard, we routinely represent the Central Long Island Pine Barrens Planning and Policy Commission in actions that protect the Pine Barrens from encroachment, pollution, and other harms that threaten that water quality.
Thank you, Lem. The next question is, I work alongside an attorney that has multiple cases which involve scam artists. One of them is a guy that cashed checks given to him in exchange for muffler shop startups. People signed leases, paid him, and got nothing. He did this nationwide and in Canada. I'm going to take this question. It seems that the question concerns possible fraudulent conduct that you may be aware of. If that's in fact, if you are aware of fraudulent conduct, the Attorney General's office would like to know about that. I would be more than happy to meet with you after the program and speak with you regarding any potential fraudulent conduct, as long as there's no attorney-client or confidential information involved. Now, the next question. Fast food companies or major national corporations, are they really violating the minimum wage laws? I'm going to direct that to Terry.
We have found, as I mentioned in my comments, a number of situations in which the franchisees are paying rates of there are the cases that I mentioned. There are others that we're currently investigating. And we have found cases where franchisees are paying below the state minimum wage for delivery workers, and where a number of these other violations are occurring. And part of that is based on the fact that there is the parent corporation which franchises out. Many of the fast food locations you see are not necessarily run by the large national chains, but they're run by franchisees who are themselves small business owners. And so we have seen very serious violations in some of these locations.
Thank you, Terry. The next question. What oversight does your office have over non-for-profit, for-profit nursing homes and assisted living facilities? And this is actually a three-part question. So the next question is also, does your office rate these facilities? If so, where can I find these ratings? And what oversight do you have on the company's solar, it looks like City? They install energy savings panels on the roof. I'm going to direct this to Alvin.
So, let me take them in turn. The first one is, what oversight does your office have over not-for-profit, for-profit nursing homes and assisted living facilities? So our office would have, for the for-profit ones, we have a Medicaid fraud unit, which is not represented here tonight, but if a nursing home is receiving any Medicaid funds, we would have jurisdiction to investigate those funds and the use of them, if there's any fraud in connection with that. If the nursing home is a not-for-profit, then our Charities Bureau, which I spoke about earlier, would have jurisdiction to investigate and see if they're following the not-for-profit laws, which would, require that the funds be going to the charitable purposes, which in this case would largely be the treatment of the patients. The second is, does your office rate these facilities? I am not aware of any rating system that our office uses. And the third is about a particular company that I'm not familiar with, Solar City.
Lem, do you want to chime in about solar panels? What, if any, oversight or involvement does our office have?
Sure. So Solar City is a large provider of solar panels that are often installed on commercial, public, and private residents to provide solar power generation. It can provide cost benefits to the building owner. That is a contract between that energy company and the building owner. And to the extent that there is illegality in any contracting issues, our office would have jurisdiction to look into that. In terms of whether solar is appropriate on any particular building, that's a matter that is decided between the energy provider and the building owner themselves.
Thank you, Lem. It looks like we have time for one more question. Remember, members of the regional office team will be outside the auditorium awaiting your questions. And also for those who put their information on the back of the card, we'll be happy to respond by phone or email. Here's the final question. Many families in Long Island are still struggling to recover after Sandy. What can your office do to help? I'm going to ask that Marty take this one.
Well, I guess, it's a very general question. How we can help is that when there are specifics to what that struggle is, if it relates to fraud in rebuilding your home, if it relates to overcharging during the storm, if it relates to people not living up to the promises that you paid for, then what we would need is greater specificity. We would need to know what the particular problem is, and then we can try to address it. So those... Right, and we should be discussing that, and we can do so. Obviously, we don't have any control over when that money is released, but I know that there's a great expectation on the part of those who are anticipating that money and it seems to add to the struggle and the burdens that have been going on for more than a year now. So, but again, we can talk about specific problems and answer specific questions, and that's probably the best approach because the question was so general.
We'll be around a little later.
And yeah, we'll be around later if you want to talk about it.
Unfortunately, and first of all, let me say thank you, Marty. Unfortunately, we have more questions that we could answer in the time available to us this evening. If you wrote down your information on the back of the card, we will be happy to respond to your question after tonight's event. You should feel free to stop by our informational table if you have any questions or issues that you would like to discuss. I want to thank the town of Hempstead and the staff for working overtime and working tirelessly to assist us in putting together this program. We thank you. As the Attorney General mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that our office is accessible to all of you. We're really here to assist you. You are our eyes and ears in the community, and it's often as a result of your complaints that you file with our office that we're able to bring affirmative cases, investigations, and prosecutions. If you have any complaints that are related to the topics that we've discussed tonight, please let us know. It's important that we get feedback from citizens like yourselves. And again, we just want to say thank you for coming out tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening.